The problem with censorship, I suppose, is that what somebody's freedom is may be objectionable to somebody else, and where you draw the line on that, is it an anything goes, or is things that you find offensive actually somebody else's human rights? These are the types of fun morning tea conversations that they have at the Free Speech Union. CEO Jonathan Ayling joins me on the program. Kia ora. Good morning. Thanks for your time today.
Good morning, Andrew. We're a fun bunch here. We have stimulating conversations. So
Exactly. And, an interesting article actually posted by one of your team looking at the gang patch issue again. Now, you and I have talked about this beforehand, but, I mean, as well as just talking about it and chatting around the water cooler, you guys have been hard at work. You've made some submissions to the government basically saying, here's some reasons why this is a really terrible idea. If it becomes legislation, here's some things you might want to add to that legislation so it's slightly less terrible. I mean, that's a summary of it, but run us through the details, Jonathan.
that's exactly right. Look, Andrew, we're always absolutely insistent that we have to be constructive actors in this space. And the reality is that the government's did campaign on this issue and have a mandate in this space. We disagree with this law. We think it sets a very poor precedent and ultimately won't achieve the results that they're ultimately seeking to acquire there. That put to one side, we've had that conversation before. I encourage your listeners to go and look at it. It's an important space to consider actually whether censorship works.
Yeah.
But this bill is going ahead, and so we're working very hard to go, all right, let's have the least bad version possible, and we're grateful that across Parliament, from all the major parties, we have strong engagement on this issue and an opportunity to work with them, including the Minister of Justice himself. And so there's really four key areas that we propose should be used to amend this legislation as it stands. And my experience in Parliament is that once a bill is progressing through Parliament, once it's in those final stages, really there's not much of a shot at all at getting that amended. Too much work and too many people have spent too much time getting it to that stage. They just say, look, it is what it is, it's going through. So really, I think this is our last shot.
We'll sort it out in the courts, which is a terrible way of doing legislation,
well,
really, isn't
it? And so then we end up having a massive backlog in the courts. But we're pleased to be able to work with the Select Committee of the Justice Select Committee Chairman James Meagher and others of his colleagues there, proposing 4 amendments to this legislation. 2 are kind of safeguards. One is a definitional question, and one is just to go, well, you get your political point, and we get the legislation dealt with eventually. So the first is just around the definition of gang, and we've discussed the fact, Andrew, that at the moment, when I say gang, you think Black Power, you think mongrel mob, and these are associations that are directly connected with criminal activity.
Yep.
And there is a real need in our society. I don't want to equivocate on that at all, for a strong response to the lawless activity that has emerged, especially over the past 5 years or so. The growth in gang numbers is not something that we should pretend is acceptable, and a strong government response is needed in this space. We would contend, though, that this law is not hitting that mark. What we're suggesting, though, is one of the weaknesses of this bill is that the term gang can be vague. It's not a precise legal term. And so what occurs when in the future different ideological groups are included as gangs and then can be harassed and silenced through legislation like this. So we want to clarify the definition there. The term serious criminal activity is a defined legal construct, and so that's the construct that we want to see it. So it means, I don't have time for groups that go and block highways and that kind of thing. I don't think it should get them designated as unacceptable associations, though, and so that wouldn't rise to the level of serious criminal activity. We think that's one of the safeguards that we could include in there.
The difference between a gang and a motorcycle club, for example, although to be fair, Hell's Angels technically is a motorcycle club, so we need to be a little bit around the definitions. Having said that, though, there are Christian motorcycle clubs. They wear patches. This is one of the grey areas that we might get into, I suppose.
That's exactly right, and I think you raised a really important point there, Andrew. A Destiny Church, obviously,
Yep.
and Brian Tamaki's. I don't know if it's Stand Up for Women or if, excuse me, if it's his group of men there.
Yep.
But recently they have engaged in criminal activity. They have gone and painted over a rainbow crossing.
Painting over
in
rainbows,
Gisborne.
is that a serious criminal activity, though? I mean, it's not
It's
that
not.
bright.
And
but, yeah.
while we've opposed their actions there, we don't think vandalizing this is a constructive way forward in any means. We don't think that they should become the object of intense political scrutiny, or excuse me, intense police scrutiny beyond other vandals. So that's the first aspect there. The second 2 points relate to the role of the Attorney General, and of course, sparing you the nerdy political details of what a Section 7 report is and why that's important in human rights law. Effectively, when Parliament is going to pass legislation that does breach the Bill of Rights, and they are allowed to do that, the Attorney General has to say, look, just so you know, you're actually unjustifiably infringing on some basic rights here, but hey, your Parliament, you get to do what you want. And so Judith Collins has said, look, in her opinion, this law breaches freedom of expression unjustifiably. It is not consistent within a democratic society that this law would pass. And we think she's absolutely right in that regard. And we think the Attorney General should have two roles in this. It's not uncommon in other pieces of legislation like this that the Attorney General would have to sign off on any prosecutions made under this law. So there's a safeguard there to say that this law is signaling some powers. We're not sure whether it will be used very frequently. And so whenever it is used, the Attorney General has to give their opinion on the subject. And I think that would mean that the Attorney General is that chief legal officer for the government, that we're making sure that it is consistent with not just the values, but the way we've articulated those values in law to protect human rights in this liberal democracy. We also think that including any additional groups on the gangs list, which is currently the way gangs would be prohibited under this prohibition of the patches, that the Attorney General should have to sign off on any further groups being added in there, so that this can't be turned into a political tool by some future governments to whack opponents that they dislike. Finally,
certainly,
I think it's important that we don't just pass legislation and expect that it should sit on the books forevermore, because sometimes a particular law is needed to address a particular problem. And so we've suggested that there should be a sunset clause included in this legislation, that after 6 years, this law should automatically retire, or that a select committee should conduct a review on it and perhaps then and be extended if it is deemed necessary. But what this means is, at a principled level, it means that we are consistently reviewing the laws that govern our land, and particularly the questionable ones, and make sure it's still fit for purpose. At a more cynical political level, it means the government is able to get their headline that they've gone hard on gangs, they've fulfilled another election policy, and we get our position that we're not left with bad law for until eternity comes. So those are the four amendments that we've put forward.
Fantastic stuff. And hey, if the blue tide goes out and the red tide comes back in again, it may all change anyway. But this actually puts it in the legislation. Now, these are proposals. As you say, you have the opportunity to submit these to people who are making the decisions. What's been the initial response, both from your supporters but also for those in power, Jonathan?
Look, I want to acknowledge, Andrew, and we consistently admit this, that a tendency to censor is a very human impulse. And so I don't want to pretend that if you have listeners that are listening going, oh, I actually quite like that idea around gangs, that they are that they are necessarily opposed to free speech at their deepest core. No, I think to censor, to silence ideas that we view as harmful or wrong is quite a natural impulse. Again, referring to the previous conversation I had, I would encourage your listeners to question, though, what will this law actually achieve? Though, what are the unintended consequences that can emerge from this? So, from our people, look, I'll be honest. There's a strong portion of society that really like this policy, and I can accept where that comes from.
You defend their right to hold that position because you're the Free Speech Union, obviously.
Of course, but we will. But we'll also engage with them and say, hey, I don't think you've got this one right. And have you thought about it from this perspective? And there's that role. I don't want to. Hopefully, this doesn't come across as condescending, but there is a role of education as well. Going, have you thought this all the way through? And the number of people, even just after our previous conversation, Andrew, who contacted me and said, I completely disagreed with you, and then I heard what you had to say, and I thought, actually, I don't like gangs, but he's not wrong. And I'm not asking you to like gangs. I'm asking you to accept that silencing people's opinions doesn't deal with the issue. And so, look, both within Parliament and within society generally, there is a relatively large community that absolutely want this to go through. And that's why we want to be constructive actors going, okay, how can we make this the best legislation possible? But also suggest that if we put aside the intense emotion of this issue, and I can relate, if you come from the Hawke's Bay, if you come from portions of the Hutt or from South Auckland, you think gangs need to be really dealt to, and fair enough. Let's not create a rod for our own back in the future, though, in the way that we do this now.
Very good stuff indeed. Hey, people can find out more information, of course, fsu.nz. Jonathan, kia ora, have a fantastic weekend. Thanks for joining us.
Ngā mihi, Andrew. Cheers.